In part 2, I built the first working version of Homii. It worked, but once I tested it with more realistic examples, the missing parts became a lot more obvious. The first version could organize an item, add an entry, schedule it, mark it complete, and keep the history. But once I added more things, I started running into questions. How do I find something quickly? How do I understand the schedule? What if I enter the wrong amount? So in this part, I want to show how Homii changed after testing the first version with real examples. Not by adding random features, but by fixing the parts that felt missing. Hey guys, I'm Chandler. On this channel, I build small apps around real problems in my life. This is part 3 of building Homii, and today I want to show how the app improved after the first version. Quick recap from part 2, where I built the first version and explained why Homii changed from bills into entries. The first version was built around 4 goals: organize, schedule, complete, and remember. So I could add something like electricity, set a date or reminder, mark it complete, and later check the history. The basic flow worked, but after testing it with more real examples, I found 4 things that needed to be improved. The first problem is search. In the first version, this was not a big issue because there were only a few items and entries. But once I start adding more things like house, passport, subscriptions, and other personal records, tapping around just to find one thing becomes annoying. So I added search. The important part is that search is not only for entries, it can search items and entries separately. For example, I have an item called Chandler, and inside it, there are entries like passport and driving license. If I type passport while search is in item mode, Homii still shows the Chandler item because the passport entry is inside it. When I open that item, I can see both passport and driving license together. But sometimes I do not want the whole item. I just want the exact entry. So I can go back to search, click the icon on the left to switch from item to entry mode. And now the result shows the passport entry directly. This makes the app feel much easier to use once there are more records inside. Instead of remembering where everything lives, I can search based on what I am trying to find. The second problem is understanding the schedule. In part 2, the schedule tab already had a basic list. It could show what's upcoming, what's overdue, what repeats, and what I completed before. But once there are more entries, a list alone is not always the easiest way to understand what's happening. So Homii now has a calendar view and a list view. I can use the button on the top right beside search to switch between them. The calendar view is for quick glance. Each date can show colored dots for different states like due, overdue, or completed, so I can quickly understand what happened on that day. The legend below gives me an amount summary for the visible month, so I can see the scheduled, completed, and overdue totals without opening every entry. If I tap a date, the list below the calendar shows the schedule and history connected to that selected date. This connects back to part 1 where I liked having calendar visibility for bill dates. I also liked recurring bills grouped by schedule. So recurring section is now grouped by repeat schedule like monthly, yearly, and other repeat types. This means I do not need to open every item one by one just to understand what repeats and how often. For me, this is where Homii starts to feel more useful as a schedule app, not just a list of entries. The third problem is mistakes. Once Homii starts keeping history, the history cannot be too fragile because I will definitely enter something wrongly at some point. For example, maybe I mark electricity complete and enter 268 as the actual amount. Later, only I realized the real amount was 286. So I added history editing because I should be able to fix one record without recreating the whole entry. Now I can open a history record and correct the amount or the completion date. And if a history record is just wrong, I can delete that individual record without deleting the whole entry. I also added manual history. This is useful for something like ChatGPT. Maybe I already have a monthly subscription entry, but I also bought extra credits. I still want that credit purchase to stay under the same ChatGPT item, but I do not want it to affect the normal monthly subscription schedule. So I can add it manually as history. This is not the most exciting feature visually, but it's important because the moment an app keeps history, it also needs a way to fix history. The fourth problem is reading the history. A list of completed records is useful, but once there are more records, it becomes harder to see the pattern. For example, if electricity has a few months of history, I do not want to open every record just to see whether the amount is going up or down. So I added amount charts. For an entry like electricity, the chart can show how the amount changes across completions. That's useful because bills are not always the same every month. By default, the chart shows all, so I can also quickly understand the total amount spent so far. The same chart idea also works at different levels. On the entry page, it shows that entry's history. On the item page, it can show the total completed amount for that item. And on home, it can show the overall completed amount across the app. I'm keeping this part simple for now since I do not want Homii to become a chart-heavy finance app. But a simple trend helps the history feel more useful than just rows of completed records. So that's the main improvement in part 3. The first version already proved the basic flow, but this version makes Homii easier to use once there are more real records inside. Search helps me find things faster. Calendar and recurring grouping make the schedule easier to understand. History editing makes mistakes less scary. And charts make the history easier to read over time. For me, Homii still feels focused on personal responsibilities, bills, renewals, and reminders. But now it handles more of the messy parts that show up after the first version. So, is Homii done now? Still no. In part 4, I want to look at recovery, settings, onboarding, and whether Homii is actually ready to use properly. If you were using Homii, which part would matter most to you? Let me know in the comments. If you want to follow the build, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. See you in the next part. Peace.